Afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining the Maryland Office of the Public Defender for our August conversation. And this month, we're going to be talking about families and community. And our topic is care and protection. When family thrives, communities flourish. Our presentation today will be recorded, but when we get to the question and answer session, we will stop the recording. So please think of your questions as we go through the presentation. We welcome a very healthy dialogue at the end after the recording has stopped. For this month's presentation, we have an extra special treat. As the experts, especially in areas of criminal defense, we have the opportunity to be in community to help families. And the chief of our Parental Defense Division will be with us today, Nina Villamar. And Nina will be presenting along with me. Really, she's going to take the meat of it to help us better understand the impact of our legal system, especially in terms of families and children, and give you a bit of a taste of the work that is being done to protect families through the work of the Office of the Public Defender. Because it's extremely important when we talk about access to justice, public education is really important in ensuring that individuals, and in today's conversation, that parents are making informed decisions, they understand their rights, and they can move in ways that benefits their families and their children's and ultimately benefits communities. So with that, we'll begin. Next slide, please. So in today's agenda, I'm going to give you a bit of an insight about the Maryland Office of the Public Defender, and then we're going to dive into it and talk about the child welfare system, MOPD's Parental Defense Division, our Better Together program, which is a pre-petition program. Then we're going to talk about upcoming legislation that we hope to see come into law. So we'll talk about the work that we're doing now in preparation for the 2026 legislative session. We're going to talk about the Know Before They Knock bill. We'll also talk about termination of parental rights, the harm of separation, and then we'll tell you a little bit about our upcoming events. One of them will be a live event next Tuesday in Washington County, where we're going to be getting more in depth into this very subject. Next slide, please. So the Office of the Public Defender mission, vision, and core values are centered around 5 basic premises. We are client-centered. We believe in and exercise tenacious advocacy. We are united in our mission. We do so in a culture of excellence, and we value diversity and inclusion. All these 5 points encompass what is the core is justice, fairness, and dignity for all. Next slide, please. The Office of the Public Defender, we touch the entire state of Maryland, from the mountains to the beaches and everywhere in between. We do so by having 52 offices across the state, and our offices are divided into 12 geographical districts, and they coincide with the district courts of Maryland. So whatever part of the state you are in, you do have access to a public defender's office. And as I said, we serve Marylanders throughout the state, from the beaches to the shores and everywhere in between. In addition to our district offices, we have specialty divisions. These are the divisions that support our lawyers every day. And in front of you, you have a list. So it includes our appellate division, our decarceration, forensics, forensic mental health, immigration, our Innocence Project clinic, which we've recently expanded from not only being at the University of Baltimore School of Law, we also now have a clinic at Maryland Carey Law. We're extremely excited about that expansion, the ability to help more clients. We also have a juvenile protection division. We do complex litigation, supports our attorneys in everyday trial work, mental health, and parental defense. You'll have the opportunity to hear from our chief today, Nina Villamar, post-conviction, social work, and government relations. Government relations is the proud sponsor of this program today. With that, I have the pleasure of introducing Nina Villamar, our Chief of Parental Defense. Take it away, Nina.
Thanks, Natasha. Hello, everyone. I'm Nina Villamar, and I head the Parental Defense Division. I've been doing this line of work for 26 years now. And the child welfare system is a network of government agencies that investigates families, removes children from their homes under certain circumstances, and then places them in a foster home or with relatives if relatives are available. Oh, I'm sorry. Next slide, please. Usually what happens is an allegation comes in to Child Protective Services, and then the Department of Social Services petitions the court and asks the court to take the children under its auspices. And so parents, as well as legal guardians, are entitled to counsel. And if they're financially eligible, the Public Defender's Office represents one parent. And then if there's another parent involved, we find a panel attorney to represent the other parent. Children are represented by counsel as well, and there are children's firms that handle the representation of children. And then the state is represented by our local Department of Social Services, and each county has a local Department of Social Services. We see that Black children are represented, Black and Brown children are represented in the system in a disproportionate manner. In 2021, we saw that Black children represented 20% of those entering in foster care, even though they comprised only 14% of the total child population. American Indian and Alaskan Native children made up 2% of those entering care, even though they constituted only 1% of the total child population. Of 1 in 41 Black children will have their relationship with their birth parent or parents legally terminated. That's more than double the rate of the general population. When I say their relationship with their parents are legally terminated, I'm referring to the state obtaining guardianship of children through the court system. And what this means is that if a court deems that parents should no longer have custody of their children and that their rights to their children should be permanently terminated, the parents will lose all rights, obligations, and any form of relationship with their children, unless the person adopting their child is willing to allow them to have contact of some sort. In most of the cases that we see, that does not usually happen. And so we have families that are permanently and irrevocably broken up by the system in this way. What the statistics have shown is that Black women are more likely than women of other races to be screened for substance use during pregnancy. And if they test positive, they're more likely to have their children removed. They're also more likely to be reported to Child Protective Services. And these reports come in from a lot of different sources because we have laws that mandate reporting by people like teachers, social workers, police officers, nurses, and doctors. And so, and the mandatory reporting requirements mean that if you don't report suspected abuse or neglect, you are at risk of losing your professional license. And you have to report if you even just suspect, even if there's no, if you don't have hard evidence yet. And so we see that Black women are more likely to have their children removed from their care and are less likely to be reunified in the system. Okay, let me move on to the next slide here. I'm sorry, 1 second, I'm not seeing the slide. Okay, in 2021, Black children constituted 1/3 of the child population, but comprised 60% of the children in foster care. And then 57% of Black foster youth in Maryland remained in care by their 19th birthday. So that's a significant number. In the Parental Defense Division, our work is based on constitutional law. The Supreme Court has held that the right to raise your children without undue interference by the government is a constitutional right. And so that's the basis and that's the core of our legal argument about why children should remain with their parents. We provide multidisciplinary representation, which means that not only do we provide legal assistance, but we also have the services of a social worker who can address the concerns that arise in the family, as well as parent advocates. These are parents who have gone through the system themselves and have completed their case, and then have come back to work with us to help families who are currently undergoing the system. In the Parental Defense Division, we currently have 35 attorneys, 11 parent advocates, and 8 social workers. We also have a skilled group of paralegals and support staff who are trained to deal with the community that we serve and the clientele that we have. We are dispersed over 8 different regional offices in the state because we represent parents in every single county in the state of Maryland. Our work is focused on preventing family separation, or if separation has occurred, we work on reuniting families as quickly as possible. I'm proud to say that our Parental Defense Division has received national recognition because of our multidisciplinary model of representation, and because we are a statewide agency. A lot of public defense offices in the country, most of them I should say, are independently operated county by county. So they don't have the continuity of training, the consistency in representation that we're able to achieve in the public defender's office. In 2023, I'm sorry, if we could go back to one more slide. In 2023, we launched a program called the Better Together program. It's actually the Better Together Early Family Advocacy Program. This is a program that allows us we're grant funded, and it allows us to provide services to families the moment that they come in contact with Child Protective Services. And the goal is to try to avoid having a petition filed to begin with. And so when we get a call, we have an attorney, a social worker, and a parent advocate who talks with the family. We help them to understand their rights and responsibilities, and then we address the issues that have brought them to the attention of Child Protective Services. Some of the things that we can do for them is provide referrals for substance use or mental health treatment. We're able to help them obtain supplies for their newborns and their children. We accompany parents when Child Protective Services visits their home to inspect their home. If they are not able to care for their children, we help them come up with a plan so that their children can be provided for by a family member or a close friend without involving the state. Again, the whole purpose of this is to avoid having the family become involved in the system. And instead, and then this also helps to keep our caseload down, and it helps to keep the cost to the state down. But most importantly, it prevents the harm that comes to families and to communities when there is state involvement in their family and a case that's opened.
Anina,
Yes.
before you go on to the next slide, I did want to emphasize, and hopefully you can elaborate as well, and it goes to the disproportionately large number of Black women that you see that are involved in parental defense cases, and the correlation when we speak about neglect. I think what people often think about neglect is perhaps some sort of intentional abuse on a child. But what we see, and you can elaborate on, are their instance of neglect are, for example, if an individual does not have enough food, or a
Yes.
filing can be made if the child comes to school and it's a cold day and they don't have a coat. What we often see is, instead of providing uh, food or clothing for the kids, that the first step is usually to remove the child as opposed to remedy the situation. And that is why the Better Together short form, the name of the program, is really important and critical, because we're helping to avoid those complaints and fill in the gaps and redirect the attention where it should be. And I think we need to take a moment to really emphasize that point, because I think it's important in terms of the education when we talk about neglect. And when people hear parental defense, I think they automatically think that the person is doing the most egregious thing.
Absolutely. What we see in the media and what's often portrayed in the media are the absolute worst cases. But those absolute worst cases only comprise a very, very small fraction of the cases that we see. What we see on a day-to-day basis are mostly, quote unquote, neglect type cases. And what we've discovered over the years is that the instance of neglect is really poverty-based problems in the home, food shortage, housing instability, inability to get children to their doctor's appointments on time because of lack of transportation, or a lack of knowledge about how to access services that are available for families. And so these are the types of cases that the majority of cases that we handle are neglect cases that are rooted in poverty. And so one of the goals of the Better Together program is to address these types of cases so that we can prevent having to have this family become involved in the legal system. So the way the cases proceed is that, as I said, usually a report is made to Child Protective Services, and then Child Protective Services sends an agent to the family's home or to the school to begin an investigation. And it's a very subjective standard about to determine when they should remove a child from the family. And what we've seen is that people who are impoverished and who may not have the same resources that those of us on screen have are disproportionately represented in the system. Their children are more likely to be removed. And then when the children are removed, they have the right to have a hearing the very next day that the court is in session. And so we get a call and we get a list of the cases that are coming in that day. And then we assign an attorney to represent parents who are qualified to be represented by the public defender's office. And the court has to decide whether to allow the child to go back home or whether the child has to stay in the custody of DSS until the next hearing. And then at the next hearing is usually when we have a full-blown trial where the court has to decide whether the things that the parents are being accused of are true or not. And then the court decides, based on what the court has found to be true or not, whether the child should be returned home or whether the child needs to stay in foster care or otherwise out of the parent's care. And at the same moment, the court has to decide what services the parents need to participate in order to get their children back. And it sounds like such a quick process, but most of these cases, when the children are removed from the parents and they stay out of the parents' care, these cases last approximately 2 years, 15 months to 2 years. And that's a typical duration of a case. Hopefully during that time, we're able to successfully reunify the family. But if not, then the court has to determine whether the parental rights to their children should be permanently terminated. We consider termination of parental rights the civil law equivalent of the death penalty because it is permanent, it's irrevocable, and it is very, very drastic. And it's extremely damaging to not only the children, but to the parents, because they lose all legal rights to have any form of contact with each other or any form of relationship with each other. And again, I think that the image that people have about parents whose rights are terminated is that they are the worst of the worst. But I can tell you from the cases that we have handled that that's not necessarily true, because what the law requires is that you have to get everything, all your ducks in a row within a certain period of time. And if that period of time has lapsed, they can terminate parental rights. And even if you've done everything, but you just did it outside the timeline, the court can say, well, you did too little, too late. And so we're going to terminate parental rights. So it's not always the worst of the worst. It could also be, it just took a little longer than what the law allows for them to get everything together. Next slide, please. So as I was saying, the majority of SINA cases are based on allegations of neglect. And I don't mean neglect like leaving your child outside all night unattended in the cold. I mean poverty-based neglect, like not having enough money to buy an adequate amount of food, or not having the money to obtain stable housing. The majority of the cases are not based on abuse. And while we think that the majority of these neglect cases could be prevented if only services were provided to families so that children could remain in the custody of their parents, what we see the state doing instead is removing children, placing them in foster care, and then starting this cycle, putting the cycle in motion, and having the parents accomplish a whole host of different things that the court and the Department of Social Services requires them to accomplish as a condition to getting their children back in care. And meanwhile, the children are out of the parents' care and suffering the trauma and the fallout of parental separation. When I give a presentation on parental defense, I always ask people to think about the first time that you're sending your child overnight somewhere. It's a happy occasion, right? They're probably going to a sleepover to a friend's house, but think about the anxiety that you felt, and think about the anxiety that your child may have experienced because they're not able to call you, or they want to go home because they miss you, but they are able to call you when they're visiting a friend. But when they're in a foster home, they may not have that ability, and you certainly don't have that ability to just reach out to them whenever you want, because foster parents don't have to allow the Department of Social Services to give out their phone number or to even give out their name or location. So that's the situation that many of our clients are facing. We're very excited about some of the legislation that we're going to be introducing again, some of them again, this year in the legislature. The first is a bill that we call the Know Before They Knock bill. And this is sponsored by Delegate Crutchfield. And it's a bill that would require the Department of Social Services during their very first contact with the family, with the parents, to tell parents what their rights are. And what we've negotiated with the Department of Social Services is that there would be an information sheet that they could then just give to the parents so that the parents would know the rights that they already have. For example, they have the right to talk to an attorney before they sign anything. They have the right to consult with an attorney before letting a stranger come into their house to do an inspection of their home, and other such similar rights. Another bill is the Preventing Harm of Separation bill. And again, this is sponsored by Delegate Crutchfield. And it's a bill that would require the court to first consider the harm of separating children from their parents before separating the children from their parents. And you would think that that's something that the court should already be considering, but it's not required by law for them to consider that. And so a lot of times they are not considering the actual harm of separation, harms that have been proven by a lot of social science that comes to children from being separated from their parents. Things like there's a decrease in their academic performance. There's psychological harm that comes from separating them and not having frequent contact. The typical amount of visitation that children have with their parents when they're placed in foster care is roughly 1 hour per week. So as you can imagine, that's a very drastic change in what they're used to with their parents. And then the termination of parental rights bill is sponsored by Delegate Tolles. And that's a bill that currently what the law says is if the Department of Social Services files a petition to terminate your parental rights and you object, which you have the right to object to, and you say, I want to have a trial on this, and you go to trial and you lose, your loss can be held against you for other children or future children, no matter how much time has passed. And it's held against you in that the Department of Social Services no longer has to provide any kind of efforts to reunify you with any other children in the future if they happen to get involved with the Department of Social Services. In other words, the parents and the children are being punished for when their parents object to the termination of their parental rights. And we think that that is a serious problem. I personally think that it's unconstitutional. And we think that the best fix for that is a legislative fix. So those are the 3 bills that we are pushing this. Oh, and here we have some details about some of the bills that we are going to be pushing this year. I think I went over some of this information already. It basically requires the Department of Social Services to provide parents with a document explaining their rights at the very first contact that they have. It's such a basic thing, right? Like you have the right to see the DSS representative's identification. Right now, strangers show up at the door and people don't understand, people don't know that they have the right to say, I want to see who you are. I want to see who you work for before I open my door to you and before I agree to let you into my house. So rights that already exist. Things like informing the parents of the allegations against them and their right to have an attorney, protecting parents and children from unlawful searches of their homes, and then, of course, protecting against family separation without due process. So what we're seeing happening, not only in Maryland, but all over the country, is that sometimes DSS will become involved with a family and they'll say, unless you agree to place your child with so-and-so, we're going to file a petition and bring you in court. And so because the parents don't understand what rights they have, they agree to this. It's called hidden foster care. And they agree to have their child placed outside of their care without the benefit of having legal advice or having a hearing to argue against that and to fight against that, and then to have the court sort of follow up with what's happening with the family so that the court can determine when the child should be brought back to the parents' care. Instead, this is all happening without any involvement by anyone else. It's just DSS coming in and sort of pressuring the parents to agree to this separation. So these are the types of rights that we would like parents to be made aware of when DSS becomes involved with them. What I didn't mention about the harm of separation bill is that it would require the court to not only consider the harm of separation, harms like emotional, psychological, academic harm, and social harm, but the court has to make written findings of the harm of separating the child from their parents so that everybody understands what the court took into consideration before making the decision to separate the children from their parents.
And Nina, why is that important in particular?
It's important because we need the courts to consider what they have to weigh the reasons for removing their children against the potential harm that can come to the child so that they can determine whether removal actually is the best course for this family. And that we can ensure that only children that absolutely have to be removed from their home and separated from their parents will be affected. and that removing children from the home should not be a simple solution that they think can be implemented without affecting the children, because the impact and the effect on children is actually quite drastic and quite traumatic for the children. Okay. So we talked about the termination of parental rights bill, and I think what I said was that so in a TPR case, if the court determines that the permanency plan for the child should be adoption, and the parent disagrees, they do have the due process right to request a trial, and they're represented by us in that trial, and we put on witnesses, the rules of evidence apply. We have discovery so that we can find out what evidence they have against the parents. But if the parent chooses to exercise that due process right and they lose, then DSS is not required to make reasonable efforts to reunify other children that already exist, or even children that are not even born yet and that are born to parents down the road. I remember one case that I had where a parent had a baby almost 20 years later, and that the department was not required to provide reasonable efforts towards this baby that was born almost 20 years after her parental rights were terminated to a child. Okay. Okay, I think that we've already talked about this slide. So though that's the gist of what the Parental Defense Division does, we represent, we get more than 300 new cases every quarter. We are a very busy division. We work with hundreds of families all the time because, like I said, these cases last for approximately 2 years each. We do have some events coming up. In the future, the Parental Defense is going to be participating in the August 19th event that is taking place in Hagerstown, where we will discuss in greater detail our Better Together program, as well as the services that the Parental Defense Division has. And then I think I will let Elizabeth Hilliard talk about these other upcoming events. And I'd be happy to answer questions that anybody has about the Parental Defense Division and our work.
Yeah, I will just highlight that the September event is going to be focused on women's issues. So women who are involved in the criminal legal system and issues that are particular to them. October will be about youth issues. October is National Youth Justice Action Month. And then November will be a little more nuts and bolts about how OPD works and, what our budget needs look like and other broader agency action that we take throughout the state. And then I will highlight that we're having the August 20th event, which is the MEJC, the Maryland Equitable Justice Collaborative, between the Office of the Public Defender and the Office of the Attorney General and community partners are having a forum in Baltimore on the 20th from 8:30 in the morning to 1:30 p.m. I know I've seen a few elected officials are already registered, so very exciting to see that. You will be hearing from all the stakeholders in the prison, jail, and detention reform group. So it should be a really great event, and we'd love to see you there. And then I think before we have questions, if Amari, if you can stop recording for us, that would be great.